Great. Well, welcome everyone. I'm really glad that you're here. It's kind of amazing to see what an array of people from all over the world have joined us. So thank you for gathering. I know for a lot of you it's late in your evening on a Friday night, so I'm particularly honored that you're joining. I hope that you and your families and your communities are all safe and healthy. These are definitely incredibly challenging times, and I know each of us are navigating difficulties both personally and professionally. Probably like most of you, I'm learning to adapt to life under quarantine as well. In my case, in Portland, Oregon, with my wife also working from home in another room and 2 teens doing online school. I appreciate that your time is precious, and I'm grateful that you're investing this hour with us. I hope this provides us all with some useful tools for the times ahead. So what we're going to share today is a practical approach for how you can leverage a set of design tools to quickly pivot your existing strategies and better navigate these challenging times that we find ourselves in. I imagine that prior to a month ago, we all had a vision of where our company was going and a strategy to get there. For us, the summit was clear and the path to get there was clear, and we were moving in the right direction. But then, of course, this crisis emerged. This pandemic has made our current path obsolete. As leaders, it's critical that we act quickly and that we react and provide our teams with clear guidance so that they can help to navigate these difficult circumstances and understand how to align and where to go. So we need to change course and focus on the near term. Our first objective has got to be, how do we get our teams to a place of safety? How do we ensure their security? We need to find that place that gets them centered and positioned and ready to make a new change in a new direction. Then we need to shift our immediate priorities and focus on finding a clear path through the crisis at hand. This doesn't mean that we need to throw away our strategies completely, but we do need to change the route, ascertain the terrain ahead, and identify the obstacles to avoid and the new opportunities that might be before us. Once we've done this, we can safely refocus our attention on the longer-term vision and return to our route with fresh eyes. What we'd like to share today is a toolkit to build a short-term strategy, what we call a resilience plan, that will help you and your team successfully navigate in the near term, but even more importantly, help you prepare to recover quickly in the future. We'll show you how to lead a workshop with your team and co-create 3 things. Number 1, a set of scenarios of what might be ahead and the actions you will need to take in each case. Secondly, a set of near-term priorities and decisions about what needs to be set aside. And then lastly, a way to manage these prioritized initiatives until we can return to a new normal. But before we dive in to our approaches to resilience planning, I'd love to understand what actions you and your organizations have already taken. Using the poll tool, please select the answers that apply. Which steps have you as a group already taken to respond to this crisis? You can check more than one. We'd like to get a sense collectively of how this group is responding. So you should be able to see the results. Collectively, about 80% of us have taken the steps to ensure the safety and security of our people. This is, of course, the most critical first step to take. We need to make sure that ourselves, our family, our friends, our community, and the people that work in our firms and our employees who are also our friends are all safe and taken care of. This also extends, of course, to equipping them to be able to be in a position to work under these new conditions. So I know a lot of firms are helping employees get set up for remote work, for instance. This is a critical first step. As we look down to the areas where there's certainly opportunity, we also see things like organizing a response team or scenario planning, doing pre-planning actions for each of these scenarios. These are areas that there's certainly lots of room and opportunity for us to work on, and really that'll be the focus of today. For those of you that have responded that we haven't done scenario planning, we haven't really done the pre-planning of the work, we haven't necessarily prioritized the work yet, I'm hoping that you're going to find a lot of value in the work that we're going to be sharing today in terms of some tools to do that very quickly and efficiently. So with that, let us move on. Thank you for sharing out. So first, I'm going to take a few minutes to set the table and understand a little bit about what we're up against. This is important because it'll help us understand and frame the scenario planning work. So a little background on some things we've learned. The first thing I want to talk about is what we're up against. while your vision and your goals have not changed in most cases, the strategies that we were following have in many cases become obsolete overnight. It's necessary to completely reevaluate our plans, our budgets, and our near-term goals with new eyes. How this crisis is impacting our companies varies wildly, depending on where you sit, what industry you're in, and the resilience of your own organization. The first lens that we as leaders will need to understand is our new context. How will this crisis impact your organization specifically? At XPLANE, we've seen a cross-section of this with our own clients. For some, for instance, healthcare organizations or companies that deliver solutions for remote work, it's resulted in a massive surge, straining resources in many cases to the hilt. We've put these businesses in the go faster category. They're finding that the existing context is accelerating their strategies and in some cases stretching their capabilities to meet the new demands. Examples of this would be one of our clients, Mural, who provides an online workspace. This is definitely a surge as they help us connect in a remote way. Another client, Abbott Labs, who has recently announced an accelerated test for COVID-19. Lots of firms that are working at frenzied paces to respond to this circumstance. These are folks that would be in the go faster category. But of course, most of us are in one of the next three categories. Some, such as many software and professional service firms whose workforces are already accustomed to remote work, we're needing to tap the brakes. We'll definitely need to plan to go more slowly, expect diminished revenues, and conserve our resources. Examples like this would include XPLANE. We're a professional service firm who's very, very comfortable with doing remote work. We've done it for many years, but we're absolutely not immune to these changes and these impacts. And so we need to replan how we're going to approach 2020. For many others, such as small businesses and many nonprofits, this is a stop the car moment where major shifts in strategy must occur to ensure sustainability. It's been interesting to watch, even in my own community, the number of organizations in this category that are quickly reacting and pivoting to, for instance, pair up to create pop-up delivery services. But these are organizations that are having to really rethink their business in order to maintain sustainability. And then sadly, there are many organizations, and in some cases entire industries, such as travel, food services, street retail, for whom this presents a break the glass moment. It's an existential crisis that will require major retooling to survive. Like you, I'm seeing this in my own town, favorite businesses in my community that have closed their doors. Depending on your industry and the individual circumstance, each of us as leaders will need to develop a different set of scenarios to help guide our response and lead our organizations through this coming phase of change. The other lens that I'd like to share before we get into scenario planning is to think about the long view. How do we expect this to play out? And how should we prepare for each phase of change that's ahead of us? As we've seen in past crisis events, whether economic recessions like those of 2008 or 2001, or the aftermath of natural disaster or major crisis like 9/11 in the United States, there are typically 4 phases on the route to full recovery that we should expect to see. During the initial crisis, we see a growing sense of fear, a disruption of our daily lifestyle, and business disruption. We, our family, and our friends, and our employees, we're all impacted at a very personal level and at a very human level. This crisis in particular exhibits all 3 of these characteristics happening in waves on a global scale and in very rapid succession. For many, the speed of this has been shocking, and it's not surprising that we're having to move much faster in many cases than our employees and our teams might be ready for. In the next phase, we need to deal with and plan for the realities of recession. We must anticipate or are already experiencing severe revenue declines, which create solvency concerns for most organizations that lack deep financial reserves, which is of course most of us. This is also a time when our company cultures are deeply impacted by the decisions that we make and how we make them. The impact, whether it be positive or negative, will be long lasting. So we need to use the culture lens as we're thinking about our decisions in terms of how we can build resilience to ensure that we are living our values and making decisions in a way that's going to allow us to bounce back and preserve our culture. This is definitely a period where organizations collectively need to examine their values, make hard decisions, reprioritize, and plan contingencies. For most organizations, this is where we're at today. We of course can't anticipate how long this will last, and we will need to build various scenarios based on available data and our best guesses. This is the period where we'll be very dependent on resilience planning going forward. What we do know, however, is that at some point we'll enter the next phase, which we call the new normal. In the new normal, the situation will stabilize. We'll have adjusted our organizational structures to match the new market reality of supply and demand. For most of us, we'll have stabilized our liquidity as a result, either through planning, structuring, or financial aid. And we and our teams will have adjusted to new ways of working and new operational norms, such as remote work and diminished business travel. This is the signal that we can begin to think with a longer-term mindset again and begin to shift from our resilience plan to a longer-term strategy once again. At this point, we'll move into the final stage, recovery, although in a new reality and a redefined context. Longer-term strategic plans will now be relevant once more, and we'll be able to take steps towards reestablishing our strategies to pursue those long-term goals. But with one major caveat, we will need to look at the strategies through the lens of the new context. How has the new normal shifted or changed our business reality, and how must we adopt our strategy to fit it? The organizations that build near-term resilience plans with this long-term view in mind will likely make better decisions. They'll both plan for sustainability today while preserving the resources that they will need and require to recover faster tomorrow. And so this is a big part of resilience planning, is actually combining the two views of the near-term needs and the long-term needs so that you make better decisions right now. The implications of both our current context and what we've learned from the past should be pretty clear. First off, wait and see won't suffice. This pandemic is different than anything we've seen before. It's fast, it's global, and it creates global fear and global disruption. This means that we're going to need to plan faster. The situation is incredibly fluid. We'll have to have a plan that is more aggressive than your peers and most of your stakeholders can probably imagine, and have it ready to go when the circumstances change. Third, overall recovery, in terms of what we expect in the long view, could be slower. This is structural. Many businesses could disappear and entire industries could be reshaped as a result of this. And then finally, the new normal might not be like anything we've known before. On one hand, we've been thrust into the world of remote work, limited travel, and social distancing, and this could be part of our new reality. But we also see new opportunities, and opportunities will be created beyond today. Structurally in our industry, we're going to see lots of merger and acquisition opportunities for firms to combine. We're going to see new enabling technologies that are going to emerge as a result of these new normal needs. And I'm personally delighted to see that already we're observing increased global citizenry and connection, as evidenced by the collection of people that are here today. Some of these changes are going to be positive. So if we're proactive, and we develop a plan that solves for immediate needs and anticipates the needs of the recovery phase, having a resilience plan will help you and your community move through this crisis towards stability at a much faster pace. So before we dive into the approaches to resilience planning, let's take one more poll. I'd love to understand where each of you are starting from and where your greatest needs are today. In your current process, where do you and your team need the most support? Let's take a minute to just get a sense of the pulse of the room, and then I'll use this information to actually help craft where we spend most time for the remainder of the hour. So this is fascinating and actually pretty consistent with the group we had yesterday. We were hosting a similar sized group, also with a very global flavor. And I am again delighted to see that this is a group of people that even in the midst of this crisis period are largely thinking about identifying future opportunities. So this is a group that's definitely leaning forward and looking into what are the possibilities, what are the potentials, and how should we prepare for those. We also see that there is a lot of focus on ensuring long-term viability, and there's going to be a good amount of opportunity around talking about how to plan scenarios and reprioritize the work in today's conversation. Thank you for sharing this information. I am so delighted that so many change makers like you are out there looking for ways to find the bright spots and the opportunities. And I think that's a critical part of resilience planning. In fact, in some ways, that is really the anchor. We have to do certain actions to maintain our viability today, but the most resilient organizations are the ones that are going to be constantly scouring the horizon for the opportunities so that they can move there quickly. So now let's talk about some practical steps that you can take. So importantly, we'll start off with this. You don't need to throw away your strategy, but you will need to change your route in the near term. When doing so, we advise that you and your leadership team look at the situation through at least two lenses. Number one, what are your immediate needs to manage through the crisis today? And secondly, what are the potential opportunities to leverage or preserve so that you can accelerate your path through the recovery in the future? There's a lot of wonderful examples of people that are finding these opportunities. And as we talk to our clients, we're delighted to see a number of organizations, as we've already mentioned, that are pivoting. One example, we work with the Science Museum here in Oregon, the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. Among our nonprofit clients, and like many of them, that had to close their doors. They were forced, because of social distancing, to close gathering spaces, which were the means of delivery of their business services. This, for them, was a break glass scenario. But scouring for opportunities, they found an opportunity to meet an emerging need and provide childcare services for families of government employees and first responders, allowing them to both generate new income to aid their sustainability and retain critical educators on their staff that would be needed to help them ramp up operations again in the recovery. This is a great example of new opportunities and having a mindset around opportunity that will help to build resilience in your organizations. So to do this today and give you a sense of where we're going to go, we're going to offer a few tools and exercises that will help frame the discussion with your organization and your leaders. First, we'll share an example agenda for a resilience workshop. The size and shape of this might vary in your own organization, but all the key elements are there. We'll then discuss a framework for scenario planning, how to actually build out the possible scenarios and prepare for them. We'll then talk about a quick exercise to prioritize the key activities that are relevant now in your organizations. Next, we'll help align those activities into a short-term roadmap. And then lastly, we'll share a tool to capture each activity, assign accountability, and track the progress. So let's dive in. We want the rest of this hour to be focused on practical tools that you can take away. The first step here is a sample agenda, which is designed for a 2-hour workshop. The attendees should be representative of your key functions. This is very much a cross-functional exercise, as it cuts across all aspects of your organization and will require both broad visibility and broad buy-in. I'm not going to spend a lot of time walking through this in detail, because we are in fact going to follow this agenda for the rest of this half hour. But I will say that this is loosely set up in 20-minute modules. You can adjust up or down as needed, and each module contains a discrete exercise with a clear purpose, and each is collaborative and engaging. It's important at this stage, particularly, that we hear all voices in this meeting. We do want to highlight that we do use the first 20 minutes to set the expectations and connect empathetically. There's a tendency in crisis communications to jump right into action planning. But more than ever, this is a time where we need to start all of our connections with our peers in our communities with an empathetic check-in to understand where people are at and have them express their voice. It will help your entire group to move more quickly and more effectively through this, with an eye towards the fact that these are humans in the system and we also need to support one another. While this is structured as a 2-hour exercise, it can and should scale up or down depending on the complexity of your organization. If you're a larger or more complex organization, you can think of each of these elements as a module, and you could design this into a series of meetings that build upon one another. So let's dive into the tools and exercises specifically. So following the welcome, the icebreaker, and the check-in with the team, which we structured as the first 20 minutes, the next part of this workshop agenda is scenario planning. And this is one of the most important steps in the process. It sets the table for the rest of what's going to come. Scenario planning allows your team to get on a proactive footing, anticipate possible solutions, and pre-think your possible responses to each in advance with a clear head. While it's not guaranteed that you'll get this right, it is likely that the situation you find yourself in will be close to one of your scenarios. For each scenario, you'll also develop your potential action plan. So when the time comes, you can make adjustments quickly. This is one of the magical elements of scenario planning. You can start to build your scenarios out. You can actually anticipate the actions that you would need to take. And then when the time comes, you're ready to move very, very quickly. You can use this canvas to frame the conversation. And let's explore kind of how this works. When we're facilitating this process, we begin at the current state in the center left of the canvas. This represents your current plan, your current budget. If you're like XPLANE, you had a 2020 budget, you had a 2020 action plan, you probably had a 2020 roadmap planned out by quarters. This is our baseline from which we build the scenarios to the left and to the right. From here, we recommend developing 4 scenarios based on our earlier conversation about your context. First, we do a go faster scenario. What if something about this crisis drives us to move faster, in part or in all of our business? For example, do you or can you, like the example we shared with Amzi, provide an essential product or service at this time? And if so, what will the impact be? This belongs in the left of our current state. This gives us a sense of, if this happens, how do we pivot? How do we shift and gear up to serve this new emerging need? Then we go to the right of the current plan, and we start to develop the scenarios to the right. In the first case, we're going to do the pump the brakes scenario. We have to ask ourselves the question, will this crisis force us to slow down? And by how much? What do we anticipate? Next, we develop a stop the car scenario. What if this crisis forces us to make major changes to our business beyond what we saw in the earlier scenario of pump the brakes? This is often the scenario in which you're starting to think about how do you retool to some degree to be able to meet new needs or emergent opportunities. And then finally, we develop the break glass scenario. This is the worst case plan. We'll need to make massive changes in this scenario to ensure our viability. For each of these, you have 2 actions. Number 1, what are the conditions that describe the scenario? This is where you're starting to understand, if we see this condition, then what will we do? So these conditions could be macroeconomic, these conditions could be your own revenue run rate, some other KPI that you're already tracking, but these should be the trigger conditions that allow you to see with clarity whether you are in any one of these 4 scenarios. Secondly, what is the necessary response or action plan if the scenario occurs? These should be your pre-planned actions. If our revenue drops to 50%, what steps do we need to take? If we have a new opportunity to serve a new need, how will we gear that up? So these are your action plans at a very high level for each scenario. The fastest way to do this exercise is to agree on the conditions, probably via discussion. Document the key conditions for each and put them into the scenario so you start to have a picture of what each scenario looks like. Then, with each scenario defined, you should lead a brainstorm of possible responses. This is where we want to get a lot of collective energy and a lot of good thinking from all of the folks in your team. We have a saying and XPLANE that the smartest person in the room is the room. And that represents the idea that our collective knowledge is actually much greater, and we'll probably see the bigger picture. So we want to get a lot of ideas on the table at this point. If you're still meeting face-to-face, possibly using a post-up exercise with sticky notes, or by having each participant make a list of ideas and then share it out, will work fine. If you're online, you can do something similar using the chat window of your web conferencing software, or you can use a digital workspace platform that will allow you to actually use post-it notes and traditional whiteboard capabilities. In either case, the point here is get the ideas captured so that everyone can see them in one place. Now, once all the ideas are on the table, you can have a discussion to prioritize them, select the plan that makes sense, and document your collective action plan for each scenario. With each of these in hand, update and maintain them as new information comes in. Where you start will most likely not be where you finish. The situation could erode, or the situation might suddenly shift you into providing an essential service, and you move back into the go faster scenario. If your business is complex, as many of ours are, different parts of your business could have different scenarios, in which case you'd probably repeat this exercise for each unique group. One quick note, for scenario planning, I recommend that you come into the room with data from reputable sources. This is definitely not a time for speculation. Most of us are not professional economists. So you want to outsource the context to the experts and then tailor your response for your own organization. For some of you in larger organizations, you may have corporate resources to lean on. But for the rest of us, here are 3 good public resources that we recommend. We will, by the way, be sharing this out, so there's no need to write these URLs down. First, Bain's Macro Trends Group does a really good job of synthesizing data and trends that impact the economy, and they provide a lot of it publicly via this website. This is also a good resource to get industry-specific data and outlooks by industry. So, for instance, to our point, we know that if we're in the hospitality industry, we're going to have a very different response than if we're in the healthcare industry, and you can get data that's specific to your industry here. Secondly, the CDC provides daily updates on COVID-19 and its guidance for individuals and employers. CDC is a great resource, especially for those of us that are in North America. And then for those of us in global locations, the other one that I recommend is the Johns Hopkins University, which does a great job at synthesizing real-time data on the crisis from a global perspective. I'd be sure to use these and other sources at your disposal to develop your initial scenarios, and then update those scenarios frequently as you learn more information. So now let's move into the prioritization module. The next step is possibly one of the most important: prioritizing how you're going to assign your resources. Crises like this one require us to ruthlessly triage our activities. You have a lot to do, but you don't likely have more resources than you had yesterday. So for everything you add to your plate, something must come off. The Start, Stop, Continue exercise is a very simple but very effective tool for this time. Start and continue activities might be obvious, but stop is often the most overlooked. And the more you start, unless your resources are unlimited, the more you might need to stop elsewhere. So the way that we conduct this activity is pretty straightforward. You're going to have your team make a list of the key activities that are on their plate and add the new activities that this crisis will force you to take on. These are your start items. We all have found that we're doing a lot of things in the last couple of weeks that weren't originally on our roadmap. These are additive activities. These fit in the start bucket. Again, you can use sticky notes or list offline or online, and then place them in front of the group. Collectively, when we can see them all, we want to then label 3 areas. One is start, one is stop, one is continue, and sort the activities into each of these buckets. If you're like most teams, there will be a lot of activities in both the start and the continue buckets. This is totally normal. But now you're going to need to facilitate a sometimes challenging discussion about what you're going to stop doing. Stop doesn't necessarily mean forever, but it does mean pause in this moment. These are the things that are not critical in the next 30, 60, 90 days, are things that we can take off our plate, or we can pause so that we can reassign those resources, people, time, energy, to the things that we've just now added to our plate that are critical. A good rule of thumb is that you should put as many activities in the stop bucket as you've added to the start bucket. When you're finished, you should have something that looks like this, probably with more activities than in this example, of course. At this point, we're going to take the stop items and put them behind us, and we're going to move forward with the rest. Now we'll begin the next module, which is road mapping. This is essentially organizing our activities into a progression over time. In this case, what do we need to do in the next 90 days? Most of us are accustomed to planning in years or quarters, but that is not our current reality right now. It'll be very difficult for most of us to predict what will happen in the next few quarters. So we need to tighten our planning window down to the immediate quarter ahead, or maybe in some cases even shorter. For this, we're going to introduce a very simple canvas that you can use to organize the activities by month. We call it the 30, 60, 90 frame. Along the left side of the frame, we list the teams or functions that will be responsible for discrete sets of activities. Oftentimes these are by teams or by functions, for instance, in your company. We then have those leaders propose their best estimate of how quickly each activity can be completed. We place each activity in the month of expected completion. So again, we're taking literally the activities from the last exercise, the continue and start activities, and arraying them into this board. This is a good time to discuss with the team 3 things. Number 1, are the due dates realistic? When can it start? And what might we do to actually compress that and make it go faster? Secondly, what dependencies exist between these activities? And how might we adjust the schedule accordingly? We're going to recognize that one of the activities that we want to start immediately is dependent on something else that hasn't yet started. So we can now start to adjust those and put them into the appropriate place. And then lastly, and really importantly, have the group scan what we see in this array and understand what's missing. Number one, do we have the resources that we need to accomplish these tasks? We might need to reassign resources. We might need to find resources elsewhere. But we want to identify resource requirements right out of the gate, because that is one of the most critical things that will slow our progress. We also want to recognize, are all of the activities here? Have we actually accurately represented the big activities that are happening in our organization? Have we missed anything? We want to know that both because we still want to do the start stuff and continue exercising those things, and also because those things might be or might impact dependencies for the ones that we've prioritized. Is there anything else that's missing? Let's add that as well. With that conversation completed and with the revisions that result, we now have a draft roadmap that we as a leadership team can focus on collectively over the short-term window that's in front of us. So now we move into the action planning module. While some of these activities are existing initiatives, many of these are going to be new. And we need to add detail and build them into an action plan that can be delegated or assigned to teams for quick action. For this, we'd like to introduce a canvas that we call the initiative tracker. It's a very simple but powerful one-pager that outlines all the key requirements of an action plan and serves as a simple tool for assigning and tracking work. This is actually field tested, which is great. It's basically and loosely based on military experience, something that's called the 5-paragraph order, which is something that's used to issue clear orders in many of the world's military services. The benefit of this for XPLANE and in our work with our clients is that it creates a very simple one-pager that allows us to boil down and condense the essence of what needs to get accomplished, who's accountable, what do we need to do, and what the measurement of success is in one place. And it allows you to very quickly delegate it to people or onboard teams very quickly, as well as see where the current status is. And we'll explore that in a second. If we start breaking it down to the elements, starting with one of the initiatives from our roadmap, there was a sticky note in there called Project Moonshot. We begin by filling in the title section. The title is actually subtly very important because this is going to become the shorthand name for the initiative as it's discussed regularly over the next 30, 60, 90 days. So Project Moonshot is already a pretty good title. It's quick, it's easy to understand, it'll be relevant to people that hear it. So we're going to go with that and include that as the title in this example. Next, we fill in the situation section. This is essentially the problem statement and the context that people would need to understand. You ask yourself, what would a team need to know to understand why we're doing this? That information belongs in the situation section. The next part is probably the most critical. What's the mission? This should be a very concise statement describing what needs to happen. This statement has 2 clear requirements that we recommend as a best practice. Number one, what's the objective? What are we solving for? But secondly, what's the measure of success? What is our expectation of where we're going to get to with this mission? So the metric or the measurement that would allow your teams to know whether they've hit their target is really critical to include in this section. Third, we want to frame the high-level next steps or action plan that we can expect the team to take. This represents leadership's intent and should be detailed enough to frame expectations, but high level enough to allow your teams the latitude for creativity, interpretation, and empowerment to go out on the ground and get done what needs to happen. This typically looks like 3, 4, 5 bullet points that allow the leadership team to be able to transmit, this is what we need to accomplish, and I hope you do these 3 or 4 activities. Probably during times of crisis, the most important element of this, given that we have the right mission and strategy, is to make sure that the initiative has a clear leader who is accountable to get it done. A lot of times we delegate things to teams and there isn't necessarily clear accountability. In this time, in these environments, it's very critical to have ideally one person listed as accountable and the leader for a particular initiative. This person should be senior enough to garner the resources to achieve the goal, but they are also the person that's going to report out to your team on the progress and help remove obstacles until it's completed. And then finally, to the right side, the team should also add risk mitigation and resource requirements. so that leadership will have clarity on what's required to complete the task and how the team will respond as obstacles arise. Our recommendations would be to complete one of these for each initiative on your 90-day roadmap, and use this as a tool to provide status updates on an ongoing basis. While you can always ask for more detail, a one-pager in these times will ensure that the critical information is transmitted and shared frequently. So now we get into the last module, governance and next steps. With the prior work completed, we now need to add a governance system. How do we monitor, measure, execute, and complete the work? You probably have existing infrastructures in your organizations, a monthly operations meeting, a weekly team meeting. We're probably going to need to think about a different governance model in these times because the information is changing so rapidly. With my own team, we're meeting 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, with our leadership team. We're responding to the situation that's happening. We're looking at our scenarios and we're understanding what's changing. And then we're identifying whether we need to adjust or pivot or make course corrections. Over time, 3 days a week is probably not necessary. Maybe it's 2 times a week, maybe it's 1 time a week. It depends on your organization. But the point is, the governance model of how you connect your team is probably going to shift in these times. It's probably going to be more frequent. For this stage of governance, we recommend that you carry forward the roadmap that we completed a couple modules back, but you update it instead of those Post-it notes that were on there with the initiative trackers that we've just completed. Imagine this as a Kanban board, which is what inspired it, a much larger sort of visualization where you can see everything in one place. Whether it's on the wall in your office or managed digitally in a remote work environment, this is a very simple way to see all of the initiatives as a team and be able to move the pieces and parts together as a leadership team. We want to see this as basically all of the in-flight initiatives and use this as the tracking tool. Every time you meet, one of these things is going to move. You can identify where they need to go, and you can respond as a team to the collective group of initiatives that you have. The initiative tracker has space, if we go back to that module, right here at the bottom right, to actually update the status of the initiative, allowing you to document 2 things that are going to be really critical in these update meetings. Number 1, we want to communicate, is this thing on track? Is it ahead of schedule or is it behind? And then secondly, we'll want to communicate in these meetings, what are the resources or the help that I need to move forward this initiative or remove obstacles that are keeping us from completing it. That can become the essence of the update on each of these initiatives on a regular basis. So lastly, putting all of this together, if we combine these modules and these tools, we have a system that will give your organizations 3 critical things to help you manage through this crisis and into recovery. We have a set of sound scenarios and action plans that will enable you to respond quickly to change. We'll have a set of prioritized initiatives and action plans to accompany them so that when the scenario changes, we can quickly pivot to our action plan. And we have a mechanism to actually track progress and measure success as we go. Organizationally, this is going to give us a, maybe not as robust as what we're used to, but a good enough solution that we can act quickly and with full view of the total set of things and activities that we need to take as an organization. Importantly, it is my hope that your organizations will, as a result, be more resilient. You will have made the difficult decisions that you need to make today, but you'll have an eye towards what you need to protect in terms of your people, in terms of your resources, in terms of your capabilities and your culture, so that you can rise to strength again tomorrow as we start to move towards that recovery. This, for me, is one of the most important components of resilience, is keeping both in mind at all times. So in terms of next steps, we'll be providing you with a copy of these slides, as well as the templates and exercises that we use today. And of course, please visit our website or contact us directly if we can be of service in any way. One thing that I am really grateful to see, and it's evidenced by all of you that have joined us today in this new normal, is how much this crisis has brought us together as one community. We all sit in different parts of the globe, and yet we are sharing this experience together and working together to make positive changes. I thank you for what you're doing to make these changes and move forward together. So it looks like we have a few minutes left for some questions. So if you have a question to share, We'd love to hear from you. Please open the Q&A tab and type one in. There's a great feature about this particular Q&A module, which is that if you see someone else has already typed a similar question to the one that you have, vote for it and it will start to rise to the top. We're going to open the Q&A up for about 1 to 2 minutes to gather your questions, and then I'll ask you to pause and we'll look at what's on your mind and address a few of them before we conclude today. Okay, so we've got Martin asks, what might different slants on this approach when you are in a startup of a new business? I think honestly, it's really a matter of shrinking or growing based on the needs of an organization. I would recommend the similar approach, regardless of the size of your organization, whether you're a sole proprietor or whether you're running a large company or whether you're in a startup phase. It really comes down to the investment of how much time you take in each of these scenarios. One thing I would call out as a startup organization is that in many cases, you probably aren't as diversified as other organizations. So you're probably going to need to spend a lot more time on the scenario and action planning portion, ensuring that you have clarity in terms of if this happens, what next. That's number one. Number two, you should probably spend a lot more time focusing on the potential opportunities. This is a place where, as a small, nimble organization, a startup has more strength and flexibility to pivot quickly. So be scouring for opportunities to be in service in this time, and you might find additional opportunities to move your organization onto a higher plane and be more resilient during the process. Second question from Carlos. Hi, and actually 5 others. Hi, I feel most of these tools work perfectly with big organizations. How to facilitate this type of workshop for small, medium-sized companies? Great. Okay, so the answer is perfectly relevant. Small and medium enterprises, XPLANE would be a good example. We actually went through exactly these steps. We spent probably about the same amount of time on our scenario planning. In our action planning, one of the benefits is we were actually able to get in a small organization all the voices in the room that were really critical to the process. So in a large organization, you oftentimes need to take more steps, do more of the meetings. But in a small organization, you can act very, very quickly. And you can probably accommodate not only the most important things in your Kanban board, but actually all of the activities of your organization. So I think that I would recommend the most important tool in a smaller organization to be focused on is actually that Kanban board, that 30, 60, 90 frame. We have the capability as a small organization to actually not look department by department or across business units, but as a small organization, we can actually see all the initiatives in one place and move infinitely faster than a large organization. So I'd probably profile that. Prioritize having for your team one view of all the key initiatives so that you can move and react quickly and combine those groups to get the answers. Roseanne brings up an interesting point. I worry about individual leaders not having the resiliency to personally stay fit and manage during these times. We can't assume that all will be able to cope. Ideas for help for these leaders. It is a really great point. We are having to do a lot more, a lot faster, with fewer resources, and we're all human. We're all experiencing the stress of what's happening to us individually as leaders, to our families, to our communities around us. I have sort of 2 thoughts here. One, at the structural level, I'm just going to highlight, this is why the STOP exercise is so important. I'm observing this with my own company and with companies that we're consulting. We have a tendency to still try to do everything, and people try to be heroes and get a lot done. We need to give those leaders space to focus on that which is most important by removing things that are not. The second element I'd recommend here is more probably cultural. If your organizations don't already invest in providing resources to your teams to support culture, to support mindfulness, to support the physical well-being, it's important at this time to stress and make space in the organization's workday for people to take breaks. If you don't historically have a flexible workforce, for instance, or a flexible structure, this is the time where you should start actually pushing out communications in your organization saying, hey, I hope you guys all take an hour in the middle of the day today to go out for a run, to go meditate, to go do what you need to take care of your family. But flexibility is a really critical point here. And then communicating to your organization that it's okay to take time for yourself isn't maybe intuitive in a time of crisis, but it's actually really, really critical that the organization's voice is giving its employees the permission, if you will, to take the time that they need to do the things that they need. This is a different time. I'm not only having to work from home, but juggle that my kids are here and my wife is working, and we are all having to balance very different things. Some people are managing elder relationships. So as an organization, please give your organization license to take time to do the things that will help them stay healthy. I have a couple last questions, and then we'll conclude. There's a question around whether or not we have suggestions about how to communicate about this process to build buy-in across an organization. I'm going to highlight and direct folks with this question to a past webinar from XPLANE on strategy activation. There's in fact two, but both deal with this theme. Strategy activation applies to the case of rolling out any process, any set of changes to an organization and helping employees understand in the communication phase what's happening, actually start to adopt new behaviors in the learning phase, and kind of move to a new normal and what we call the live it phase. So check out strategy activation 1 and 2. The first one is the theory. The second one is probably the most relevant for your question, which is actually the how-tos, the practical tools that we'd want to use. And then I think the last question we're going to take before we close, there is interest in knowing, can this same structure also be used as a going forward planning and execution mechanism? Absolutely. This is, I'd say, the plus, we could say plus delta, the plus being what's good about it, the delta being what would you change or maybe where are the limitations. The plus of this is that it's a very simple system, and it's a very flexible system. It can be adopted by any organization. The delta is that it is not always as robust a planning structure as some organizations need, especially if you have the flexibility to have a longer time frame. But much of what you're seeing here is based on lean, for example. And I think for small and medium organizations especially, this is a fantastic operating system to use in a general basis. The nice thing we know is that there's underneath that one pager, there's always a lot more detail. But as an operating system, that one pager that is really the unit of this system works very well to summarize what's happening. And you can always double click down with the team that's working on that project to learn more when you need to. But this keeps everything at a very high level. So we actually use this ourselves. And I do recommend it as an ongoing tool if you find it valuable. So with that, I would like to thank you for some incredibly thoughtful questions. I know that we're all going to be learning and getting through this together. We will address some of these additional questions in our follow-up, and please feel free to reach out to me at any time or anyone at XPLANE. If we can offer you advice, we're happy to do it. We're happy to hop on a Skype, happy to hop on a chat. These are times where we're all needing to make ourselves available to support our community. So we'll gladly do that. That will conclude today's webinar, but certainly not the work ahead. Please reach out to us or to me directly if there's any counsel or support that we can provide you. We're absolutely all in this together, and we are going to be moving forward together. Blessings to all, and our thanks to you. Stay safe.